Bring in show music, please.
Hi, I'm CNBC producer Katie Kramer. Today on Squawk Pod. Paying our bills, the federal ones. Congressman Jodey Arrington.
At some point, we're going to run out of other people's money.
Debt is a key election issue in 2024. The Republican chair of the Budget Committee on the politics and projections.
We had over 3% GDP prior to COVID. And if we grow 1% over what CBO projects, the 10-year annual GDP average, which is 2%, paltry 2%, then we will reduce the deficit by $3 trillion.
And Carson Daly calls himself that dude from MTV, but it's his mental health journey that is making a difference.
The best day I've ever had was when I got diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder.
The Today Show co-host joins us with Phil Schermer, the founder of Project Healthy Minds, trying a modern approach to accessing help.
It should be as easy to find mental health services in America in 2024 as it is to book a flight, a hotel, or a restaurant reservation.
Plus, bracing for Hurricane Milton and breakup, the DOJ targeting Google.
The Justice Department gets around to these things once, the monopoly may be on the verge of falling apart itself.
It's Wednesday, October 9th, 2024. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue it, please.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We are live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernen and Andrew Ross Sorkin, and the futures at this hour under just...
Hurricane Milton is expected to make landfall on the west coast of Florida sometime between Wednesday evening and early Thursday morning. The storm has moved a little bit slower than initially projected.
If you're under evacuation orders, you should evacuate now. You should have already evacuated. It's a matter of life and death, and that's not hyperbole. It's a matter of life and death.
Now let's talk about what's going on with Hurricane Milton right now. Expected to make landfall in Florida this evening, and the storm regained Category 5 strength overnight with maximum sustained winds of 160 miles per hour. It's on now a projected path that could directly strike Tampa Bay, a densely populated area that is vulnerable to coastal flooding. The region has not been hit by a major hurricane since 1921. It's dodged several major storms in the past years that appear directly headed for it. Forecasters projecting a storm surge of 10 to 15 feet for the Tampa Bay area and up to 18 inches of rainfall in parts of Florida. Officials there, including Ron DeSantis and President Biden, have been strongly urging people to evacuate, but that window is now closing. In Tampa, you're seeing St. Pete, Clearwater, and Orlando airports already halting most of the operations. Walt Disney World, Universal Studios closing early today and anticipate remaining closed tomorrow. And you're already seeing just how difficult it is to get out of town.
I don't know if you've seen, we were just showing some of the debris that's there from the Hurricane Helene that hit 2 weeks ago. That's been a major issue. It's something Ron DeSantis was talking about yesterday in preparations for this, trying to get everything cleared off the streets. But every time they clear streets, if you listen to the officials there, people bring more things out of their homes that were flooded just 2 weeks ago.
And it's those items that then become projectiles.
Right, and that's been a huge issue of concern.
Did you catch the weird trending Twitter thing yesterday on between President Biden, Vice President Harris, and Governor DeSantis? It was bizarre. It was after Vice President Harris said what a poor job DeSantis was doing. President Biden, I don't know, maybe he didn't know.
That could be the case.
That could be it, or it could be more than But President Biden said Ron DeSantis is doing a great job. He's doing such a good job. I even gave him my cell phone number to call. So.
I mean, DeSantis' point when he didn't take the call from Kamala Harris, his point was she hasn't called in the last 3.5 years. I don't need her. We have what we need.
But I'm just wondering, is everything hocatory in Biden, Kamala land?
I thought it was not coordinated.
That probably
is what.
What's worse?
And that it all of a sudden
you don't
political.
think he's resentful at this point about the way everything happened?
Oh, you think Biden was doing this?
I don't know. No, not despite, but I'm just wondering if there's no love.
That was not my read.
I don't think there's any love lost between
my other
Biden
read, though,
and
was
President Obama. I don't think there's any love lost.
But my other read on this was Biden has called DeSantis during these hurricanes over the last 4 years.
In the past and had a good relationship.
And historically, it is the president of the United States who calls the governor when there's a hurricane or a problem. The vice president, it wouldn't be your role to call. I mean, it would actually be almost out of your role.
Well, it's this weird.
Well, I think that was DeSantis' point.
It's this weird succession. Like we're in this haze right now where I think around the world, nobody's really sure of who's. It's kind of like if she's going to be president, then she's kind of already, and he's, if he wasn't ready to be president, is he still, if he couldn't be president for another 4 years, is he still president? I think I don't know.
I mean, look, I think Biden's point was, I'm still talking to him and we're in control. And DeSantis did say he had what he needed from the federal.
Has there ever been a dynamic when LBJ? I don't know if there's ever been a dynamic like this where, where he's almost a lame duck before he's a lame duck. After the election, you're a lame duck because you're waiting till the 21st of January. But in this case, once he was not going to run, which was similar when LBJ said, I'm not going to, I don't know.
Right, I assume you would be blamed, you were the lame duck.
For that entire.
Similar scenario.
Right, but and LBJ's, I can't remember. I don't. It wasn't his. Yeah, it wasn't Humphrey. I think it was Humphrey.
Let's talk about what's going on late yesterday in the world of Google, because the Justice Department made recommendations for Google's search engine business practice, indicating it is considering a possible breakup of the tech giant as an antitrust remedy. At least that's what they may be suggesting and is on offer. Eamon Javers joins us with the latest. Eamon.
Yeah, good morning, Andrew. In a court filing just after 9 p.m. last night, the Department of Justice said it is considering a breakup of technology giant Google and is contemplating sweeping changes to the business practices of the company. The DOJ said the measures it would like to impose could include contract requirements and prohibitions, non-discrimination product requirements, data and interoperability requirements, and structural requirements. Now, it's that last term, structural requirements, that indicates that the DOJ is thinking about ways to force Google to sell or spin off chunks of itself. Now, this is the first look that we've gotten at what the Department of Justice thinks a post-trial Google should look like, but it is just a high-level proposal for now. DOJ is expected to offer a more detailed framework by the end of the year, and a federal judge is expected to make his ruling by the summer of 2025. So we've got a ways to go here. Google, remember, lost the case in August when a federal judge ruled that it did have a monopoly in the search market. Google reacted aggressively last night in a blog post bashing the DOJ's radical and sweeping proposals. Google said, "We believe that today's blueprint goes well beyond the legal scope of the court's decision about search distribution contracts." A spokesman for Google rival DuckDuckGo said, "This proposal smartly takes aim at breaking Google's illegal hold on the general search market now and ushering in a new era of enduring competition moving forward." In its filing, the DOJ said it's considering ideas that would limit or end Google's use of contracts, monopoly profits, and other tools that allow Google to be the default search engine on many devices. Now, one idea here that's really sure to be focus of attention is requiring Google to make publicly available the indexes, the data feeds, the models that they use for Google search, as well as Google search results, features, ads, including underlying ranking signals. All of that could be forced into the public domain, largely for other companies to use here. All of that could chip away at Google's dominant position, of course, in search, but it might open the door for a lot of rivals and competitors and new entrants into the market, guys. Back over to you.
Eamon, a couple questions. First, what do you see as the timeline for how long this process would take? I mean, I'm assuming many years, but how many years?
Yeah. Well, that's a really great question. So what we know over the next couple of months, let's start there, is that this is the first initial proposal from the Department of Justice. It's a high-level proposal. They're now going to go and do more due diligence. They're going to get access to Google's internal emails, to their books. They're going to look at all the systems. They're going to talk to experts. Then they're going to come up with a detailed framework for potentially breaking up the company or whatever the quote-unquote remedies are that they want to fix the monopoly problem. all of that's expected to be done by the end of the year. Then Google's going to have a chance to fight that every step of the way in the process in front of the judge. The judge will then, starting next spring, go into his chambers and give it a deep think, and then by the summer of 25, come up with a ruling. You can imagine that whatever that ruling is, that will be challenged by Google. They will appeal. And that could go on for years. How many years is anybody's guess, but we're at the beginning stage here of a potential breakup of Google, not the end of this trial process.
Is there any precedent for this idea of revealing what might be considered the recipe inside a company? I mean, you're talking about the search data, all of the feeds. One of the things that's surprising me about that as a remedy is the truth is Microsoft has Bing. There are other search engines in the world that actually, in many cases, are comparable in some ways. That's not why people are using one versus the other per se. Part of it very well may be some of the reasons that these questions about antitrust, the fact that it's my default on the phone. Other people think it's just a better system, but it's not that there's some secret thing that they have that nobody else has.
The defaults were really the key to this trial. I mean, there was a lot of talk about defaults throughout, and just the idea that, basic human behavior is when the default is loaded on your phone, you don't really change it, even though it might be technically possible for a consumer to do that, whether it's 5 boxes you have to check or 12 boxes you have to check, people just don't do it, right? And so those defaults and the huge amounts of money that Google pays to have access to those defaults, I think that's going to be maybe number one on the Department of Justice's list in terms of changing the behavior of Google. And that'll open up a lot of devices potentially for some of these rivals. So, you might see Bing a little bit more. You might see DuckDuckGo a little bit more. And in the era of AI search and AI summarization, you might see all kinds of things. One of the things they talked about in this proposal last night, guys, is the idea of allowing websites to opt out of being crawled by Google for Google's AI summary product, right? So if Google's out there summarizing, sort of the known things about, the World Series or whatever your search topic is, World Series type websites could say, no, I don't want Google to summarize my content for its AI product. A lot of changes here potentially coming to the search industry, and all of that has potentially huge ramifications for the shape of AI to come.
Seems like an old fight.
It does. That's what I was thinking too. The Justice Department gets around to these things once the monopoly may be on the verge of falling apart itself. Eamon, the company's response to this, in part, was that if they go ahead with some of what they call these incredibly, I think, draconian. I forget exactly the word they used for it, but they basically implied that these were draconian sort of radical, right? That's the word I was looking for. So the radical changes they were looking for, the company also said that it would break the company potentially if they were to go through with some of those radical decisions, as they call them. Stock's only down 1.25% today. I guess that's in part because there's going to be years of back and forth before there's any remedy that gets put in place. And I guess also potentially that could change if there's a different administration that comes about. But I don't know that a Trump-Vance administration would look much more favorably at big tech.
Yeah, I mean, 2 thoughts. One is, remember, this case was originally filed under the Trump administration. So, I think Trump would continue right along this vein, especially when it comes, as you say, to big tech. And then the other question is, what happens to Android? What happens to Chrome? Do those get spun out as separate companies? And what does that do to Google's prospects? And the big question here is, what's in this for Wall Street, right? I mean, a lot of folks on Wall Street sort of reflexively look at a thing like this and say, this is bad. This is the government going after corporate America and telling companies what to do, and that's almost always bad. But one of the potential outcomes here is simply more publicly traded companies for Wall Street to invest in. And so if you're a Wall Street investor, you might look at more opportunities for profit and more opportunities for growth. Yeah, right. All the baby bells, exactly. You could have a lot of baby Googles out there. And if you're a Wall Street investor, is that more appealing to you in terms of the potential for growth than one giant Google where, that's a mature business potentially and not growing as fast?
Okay. Eamon, it's something we're going to be talking a lot more about. Thanks.
Tease will be next.
Coming up next on Squawk Pod, the debt bomb heading right for us. The chairman of the House Budget Committee, Representative Jodey Arrington, on a new projection for the federal deficit.
If you look over 10 years, we're going to add over $20 trillion to the national debt. We're paying over 50 cents on every dollar just to service the debt.
Back after this. This is Squawk Pod.
Up and Andrew, Q.
You're watching Squawk Box on CNBC. I'm Andrew Sorkin along with Joe Kernen and Becky Quick. We got a lot going on this morning. According to the latest report from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, 2024's federal budget deficit has now hit $1.8 trillion. That's with a T. It's the highest level in 3 years. We're getting this news as economists try to parse the presidential candidates' plans to see how much they would add or maybe hopefully subtract at some point, but I don't think this is part of it, the deficit and debt. Joining us right now, House Budget Committee Chairman Jodey Arrington. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Andrew.
So $6 billion a day is the cost.
Unsustainable. At some point, we're going to run out of other people's money, and the people we're borrowing from, some of our foreign creditors like Japan and China, by the way, will stop loaning us money to pay for an ever-growing government where we have almost $2 trillion in an annual deficit. If you look over 10 years, we're going to add over $20 trillion to the national debt. We're paying over 50 cents on every dollar just to service the debt. That's more than we spend on all of national defense. That cost is almost $1 trillion. That's more than we're spending on Medicare now. Mm-hmm. So the wheels are coming off the wagon, and we have to have a plan to reduce our spending, stabilize the debt by just growing faster than we're spending, and getting back to economic growth.
This would have been a good year to do it because revenue was up 11%.
Yeah, we've seen record revenue, by the way, ever since
corporate revenue up 26%, but spending was up 11%.
Is outstripping our revenue.
There's a great chart on the front of the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, look, if we grow 1%.
We've just been outspending every single year.
Yeah, we have. But look, the foundation's always going to be growth. We had over 3% GDP prior to COVID. And if we grow 1% over what CBO projects, the 10-year annual GDP average, which is 2%, paltry 2%, then we will reduce the deficit by $3 trillion. We'll bring the debt
to let's talk about how do we grow and are we actually going to have a real conversation about cutting? Because I was going to say, in terms of cutting spending, neither candidate on the presidential end of things and very few in the Senate and Congress seem to be talking about cutting anything ever.
Yeah, well, I think there are two myths on each side of the equation politically. One party thinks that you can tax your way out of this deficit hole, and you can't. You'll run out of other people's money, as Margaret Thatcher says, and you'll destroy the economy, quite frankly. That this is the worst time to consider adding taxes on our job creators or our families suffering with the worst and most regressive tax of inflation. At the same time, there's a myth on the Republican side that we can just grow out of this $2 trillion, soon to double in the next 10 years, et cetera, about $130 trillion over the next 30 years. It won't happen. We won't get there if we don't rein in spending.
You can look at,
so we have to combine the cuts.
Right, but nobody wants to have the cut conversation.
No, I do.
If I said to you, where do you cut?
Oh, listen, let's start with unspent billions of dollars of COVID. Let's start with tens of billions in funding for illegal immigrants.
Where is that money, by the way? So there's, you read these headlines and say there's $200 billion or all this money from COVID that's been unspent. Where is that money?
It's like the monies we're spending on illegal immigrants. It's housing, it's health care, it's welfare. But
it's spent or it's unspent? People say this is like the COVID money is unspent.
It's appropriated but not spent. And listen, it's just billions, but there are tens of billions in spending. In fact, it's $9,000 per illegal immigrant in fact, CBO just did a report, $16 billion on Medicaid spending. This was just last week for people here illegally. And I can go through a list.
There are, I should say, by the way, I also saw some new data which surprised me, and I don't know what you do about it. The cost of removing illegal aliens from this country could be astronomical as well, which we have not figured out.
They put that in those deficit plans. Why Trump's is worse, but we're not talking. But we're not talking about cutting right now. On the Trump side, no tax on Social Security, no tax on tips, no SALT cap anymore. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But on the other side, we're not talking about cutting. Do you know what this new entitlement for home health care would cost if you put it under Medicare? It's $288,000 a year for people to be take. You add to that $25,000 for down payment on houses, $3,600 child tax credit, $6,000 baby bonus, universal pre-K, and paid family leave. That's not cutting spending. Those are layering all this new spending. I don't know how much that is that I just mentioned.
That's complete new spending. But then there's the other argument on the other side.
Well, I said that, but
well, no, not just that. You get tariffs, and then what does that do to the economy, and how much can you collect in taxes?
If we had 26% higher corporate revenues, why do we need to screw with that and go up to 28% on the corporate tax rate?
Well, I think that Trump has a list of things that I would say are a starting point for negotiations.
No, he wants to go down to 15.
Well, that's right.
But she wants to go up to 28.
So do you think that going to 15 is the right answer? Given what you just laid out.
Domestic. These are a list of proposals for consideration. What we have to do is keep taxes low, keep our businesses competitive. How that shakes out in terms of any one provision is up to negotiate.
Very specifically, because all these are going to be specific. So if I said to you 15%, would you vote in favor of 15%?
I'm more interested in locking in permanent tax breaks for small businesses that will expire next year, like the 20% deduction, the 199A for small businesses, where Kamala Harris and her tax proposal would allow that to expire. And then when she says she's not going to tax anybody making less than $400,000, that's just simply not true. There's 1.5 million businesses that gross, as you know, well over $400,000, but they don't take home $400,000.
If we go to 28, you add in state, that'd be some of the highest in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess what I'm saying is this.
Yeah.
And can you have both ideas in your head, and can you say them publicly? That the Harris plan, as it relates to taxing small businesses, may not be good, and at the same time, 15% may be too low. Can you say that aloud?
Here's what I was. Let me tell you what.
I understand. I'm just saying that.
Let me tell you what I can. Let me tell you what I can say out loud. We need the lowest rates to have our job creators have the most competitive posture vis-a-vis their competitors.
So would you go to zero?
And we need, by the way, we need the lowest tax rates on our families whose wages have been burned through by inflation.
Would you only do it for companies that do it here? That's like weird corporatism.
Here's the point.
Isn't that industrial policy?
Here's the point. You can keep taxes low, but you have to reduce spending commensurately. You have to bring down the structural imbalance in our mandatory spending, which is 75% of the budget. You can't just defer the tax, which is what increased deficits are, a deferred tax on our children.
So my question to you, therefore, is your candidate is former President Trump.
Yes.
Do you believe that there are plans that he has articulated that would bring down, not just grow the economy, but bring down those costs and the spending piece? Are you aware of those? And what are those?
Well, I can tell you that he's talked about this efficiency commission with Elon Musk, and I can assure you that starting with $236 billion in waste and fraud in healthcare and welfare entitlements, there is a ton of waste. And so this guy's run a business. He understands that you've got to clean up your balance sheet. He knows how much waste is in the federal government. He knows the bloat that was carried over in the bureaucracy from COVID. He knows all the waste in welfare. He knows what incentivizing work will do to save money and get people out of the welfare trap.
I just ask, because he was there during COVID, and some of that bloat happened as a result of programs that he put in place. And in fact, I think if you were to talk to Steve Mnuchin, he would say, we decided that we had to throw everything at it. And we knew that in the moment, there was going to be waste and fraud and all sorts of things. And so here we are now saying that he's the responsible party in all this.
No, I would not say that. You're saying that. What I would tell you is
he's not. Okay.
No.
He's not the responsible party.
Look, there's a big difference in having to spend money in the middle of an unprecedented crisis. I think everybody would say it was unprecedented.
Yeah, totally.
Right? And there was a lot of unknowns when he was at the helm at the beginning of COVID. Fast forward to 2021, the first year of President Biden and Kamala Harris. There was $1 trillion still unspent from all the COVID relief prior to them showing up. $1 trillion. What did they do? They added $2 trillion most of which was not COVID related. It was blue state bailouts, bailouts for union pensions, all kinds of progressive pet projects. That is what lit the fuse that ignited the inflationary firestorm. It's very different. You got one president that spent in an unprecedented disaster, one that spent $2 trillion that created an unprecedented disaster.
You demonstrably believe that without that bill, there would have been that inflation would have remained super low.
I
that
think
supply chains have nothing to do with this?
I think the Federal Reserve...
How would you explain that relative to all of the inflation that happened around the world?
Listen, supply chains had some
By the way,
role.
I believe, like you, that that bill played a role in inflation. Do I think that that was the match that lit the fire? No, I think that empirically the supply chains lit the fire because we saw that happen everywhere else.
If you add the dollars to the supply constraints,
listen,
the supply constraints were there, and then you throw too many dollars at it, that just...
Larry Summers, ask Democrat economists who said the bathtub was overflowing. We flooded the market with federal monies, with stimulus monies. We created a chasm in the imbalance in supply and demand.
Larry Summers, Jason Furman have all said the same thing.
They've all said the same thing.
The United States did have lower inflation than what we saw overseas.
We had low inflation. We had higher wages. We had lower unemployment. We've had 25% increase in unemployment recently. We're at 2% GDP. But there's no comparison in the pre-COVID Trump era and what we're experiencing today.
We should always lead the world as the United States.
Are you surprised, real quick, are you surprised as to how strong the economy is today, given the corporate profits that Joe just mentioned?
I don't think it's strong.
You don't?
No.
Even though they had those profits?
The last several months, save and except the last month, and I think there's some problems with the numbers, have shown increase in joblessness. We've had a 25% increase in unemployed people in this country. Anytime we've had that, we've had a recession. And
so you don't believe the jobs numbers we just got?
I think there's a lot of government jobs in there. I think there's a lot of people working 2 jobs in there.
The August numbers were revised higher too, though.
The jobs numbers were revised downward by the Bureau of Labor Statistics by almost 1 million jobs. I think this thing is a lot more fragile than people think, carrying this kind of debt load, coming out of it.
Right.
I don't think the Federal Reserve would have put 50 basis points on their cuts if they weren't concerned about a potential recession.
Are you surprised then how the stock market's almost at all-time highs here? Are you surprised by that?
I'm not surprised. It's going to fluctuate, but it ended up lower than higher when the Feds cut the interest rates was counterintuitive.
But if it was terrible, you would accept it. Or if it was terrible and people thought it was going to be terrible in the future, you would think that the market should
it's
be
a
lower.
lot better than people predicted. But you know what? Just like the CBO report, it was different than what was predicted. Joe Biden's and Kamala Harris's first year, they projected the annual deficit to be $900 billion. It is almost $2 trillion. So it's a lot worse than projected. But yeah, the markets have been more resilient than we anticipated.
Chairman, thank you for coming in this morning.
I love being here. I'm a long way from the cotton patch of West Texas.
You're invited anytime you want.
We just heard oil's, just to make your day, oil's going to 50.
Yeah, well, let's see how Israel...
And the Cowboys are never winning another Super Bowl. They just said that.
Oh, man, now I didn't think you'd go there,
That's
Joe.
low. Right. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me.
Appreciate it.
Next on Squawk Pod.
I was having panic attacks.
Carson Daly, host of The Voice and co-host for Today, had a surprising journey to talking about mental health and sharing his own struggles.
It really struck a chord with me that in popular culture, there wasn't this much advocacy being done in mainstream, and it just seemed like a lot of people needed help.
He joins us next with the head of Project Healthy Minds, trying to connect people to the help they need. We'll be right back. You're listening to Squawk Pod from CNBC. Here's Becky Quick.
Tomorrow, Project Healthy Minds is going to be hosting its annual World Mental Health Day and Festival in the gala that they're holding in New York City. Those events are going to be featuring thought leaders and celebrities like Demi Lovato and Chance the Rapper. But joining us right now to talk about it is Carson Daly. He's the host of The Voice and co-host for Today. He's going to be hosting the festival's gala. We're also joined by Phil Schermer. He's the CEO and founder of Project Healthy Minds. And gentlemen, welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Becky. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for being here. Phil, why don't we start off talking about what this project is and what it's bringing?
Yeah. Look, at the core of what Project Healthy Minds does, there's 65 million Americans with a mental health condition. 60% don't know where to go to find help. And the core of what we do is build a digital platform to help connect Americans to mental health care. And our World Mental Health Day Festival and Gala, as you know, stigma is an enormous issue in America, and it's about creating one place for thought leaders to talk about mental health.
And what you guys have created with the website is a way, like an Expedia, where
Yep.
people can go and find the best ways to get the mental health care they need.
Exactly. We talk about it as an open table or Expedia for finding mental health services. It should be as easy to find mental health services in America in 2024 as it is to book a flight, a hotel, or a restaurant reservation.
Agree. Carson, why don't we talk about how you two met? I think it was back in 2017.
Yeah, so my mental health journey is one that I hadn't really talked about. So we did a piece on Kevin Love, the basketball player on the Today Show, who had written an article for the Players Tribune about having a panic attack during an NBA basketball game. And as this piece is running on the Today Show, Craig Melvin, my colleague, is sitting next to me, and I said to Craig, this happened to me at MTV years ago. I've had this exact experience. He asked me about it. I ended up talking about it on the air, and I ended up probably for the next month or two, the producers, everybody really reacted to that mental health story you told. So it ended up being, now it's this work that I do, and I met Phil on the heels of that. He came in to launch Project Healthy Minds. He came in with a rapper named Logic, who had done a song that was the national crisis line for the National Suicide Hotline. It was on the MTV VMAs, and the calls for the crisis line went up 50%, and it really struck a chord with me that in popular culture, there wasn't this much advocacy being done in mainstream. And it just seemed like a lot of people needed help. And so I just jumped on board.
I think you telling your story means a lot, though, because to have a very successul person who millions of people watch every day and look up to say that, yeah, I've struggled with panic attacks, too.
Yeah.
What happened? How did it come about?
Well, I feel like I have a joke that it's almost like that movie Fight Club, where, the first rule of Fight Club is that nobody talks about it. And that's, I grew up in the 80s where I didn't discuss mental health. One stat that we always like to tout is that the time that elapses between somebody who has a mental health symptom and when they actually go out and get help, that time period is 11 years.
So that's what I was going to ask. Can you just, for the audience, because I think a lot of people suffer from either anxiety or depression or panic, but they don't know. They don't know if this is actually a mental health crisis or an issue for them, or this is just a momentary, right? It's very hard to self-diagnose yourself.
Totally.
If you will.
Totally. And I think that's one of the things that's important is it's easy when there is a cultural stigma around mental health. It's easy to justify to yourself that how you might feel isn't really anything serious. And so it's easy then to put it off. And part of what we need to do, like all things in healthcare, is get people started earlier in their journey working on their mental health, the same way you work on your physical health.
Right.
Before you hit some health crisis.
I mean, I say, like, if we play a pickup basketball game and you roll your ankle, how long does it take from when you're like, wow, did I break it? Is it a high sprain for you to go to urgent care? It might take, if you have a business breakfast, maybe 2 hours for you to get, but it takes people 11 years. They suffer in silence because they don't know. I was having panic attacks. I look back now, I dropped out of college. I'm pretty sure now that when I dropped out of college, I had a panic attack in that English class that led me to my counselor led me to drop out. Music has saved my life because when I hear music, it calms me down and makes me feel good. I think I've had a career as a DJ and MTV and NBC and all these places, being as close to music as possible, strictly related to its relationship with me and my own mental health.
Did it get better once you started seeking help?
The best day I've ever had was when I got diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder, because I didn't know it was a thing. I thought I was losing my marbles. I really thought I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know that your brain could literally send a false signal to your body and tell you that there's an imminent threat here and you need to get out of this room when that actually doesn't exist. I didn't know that was a model. I didn't know it was anything real.
Phil, the current state of treatment, is it involve like psychotherapy? What is it called? Psychotherapy and drugs?
There's a whole
both.
Yeah, there's really a whole spectrum from meditation to therapy, psychiatry, inpatient, peer-to-peer support.
But it's all mediated chemically, so if you have low neurotransmitters of something that will predispose you to being depressed, you can only fix that with helping the chemical imbalance, right? Or can it be done through therapy?
Yeah, well, it can be done by all kinds of things, and I think over people's lives, you need different types of mental health support. What you need at 22 is different than what you need at 32 or 42.
Well, and there's different things too. I was talking to somebody yesterday about acute depression. When you have something that happens in your life that triggers you and puts you into that, it actually drops your serotonin levels significantly.
Yeah.
So it's a lot harder to restart that unless you are talking to somebody and maybe getting drugs that would boost those serotonin levels back.
Right, but having this conversation in this platform and in society now, in popular culture especially, which I think is what I bring to the table, because people see me and go, oh, you're that dude from MTV, and here you are having this conversation about mental health, trying to normalize the conversation or break the stigma. And I think once we can get to that, that's kind of the point of all of this in Project Healthy Minds and our gala and our festival, is just to get the same way that Kevin Love or anybody else in the press has talked about, Michael Phelps and I have talked forever about this, or Simone Biles, the more people that unlock their stories, that everybody watching is like, oh, they can relate to that.
Yeah,
as soon as I get out of here,
very successful people coming and talking about this too makes you feel like,
well, if they can do it, I'm going to be okay.
Right, and it's something that is very open to be able to be talked about.
I just love that you call yourself that dude from MTV. I remember watching.
I know it's right here.
I'm having Press Live right
I'm
now.
having flashbacks of it right now.
Right.
Do you guys ever shut down Times Square? Like, does InSync ever stop by?
No.
CNBC anymore?
No. You know.
Elmo.
No. Elmo? Yeah.
Elmo.
Naked Elmo outside.
Naked.
Oh gosh.
Elmo's always naked though. If you think
that's
about
true.
it.
Yeah.
And the naked cowboy once in a while.
Oh, is he still around?
I don't think
I haven't seen him in a few years.
Every
Not since
day the
COVID.
naked cowboy was here.
Yeah, he was here until about COVID.
Oh, wow.
And we've lost him.
Well, thanks for letting me have a little trip down memory lane by coming.
Carson, Phil, I want to thank you guys very much.
Thank
It's
you
an
guys.
incredibly important project, and we appreciate your talking to us about it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
That's Squawk Pod for today. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for taking care of yourself. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Tune in weekday mornings on CNBC at 6 Eastern. And to get the smartest takes and analysis from our TV show right into your ears, follow Squawk Pod wherever you get your podcasts and listen anytime you want. We'll meet you right back here tomorrow.
And we are clear. Thanks, guys.